Good afternoon. I'm Kate Kirby, CEO of the American Physical Society, and I want to welcome you to the 2018 APS Annual Business Meeting. We're doing this in the Columbus Convention Center just prior to the start of our April meeting here in Columbus, Ohio. You'll hear from a number of elected leadership folks as well as staff leadership of the Society. And we will entertain questions at the end of the hour, not after each individual presentation. So first up is our APS President for 2018, Roger Falcone. Roger is a professor at University of California, Berkeley, and former director of the ALS at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So, Roger.
Thank you, Kate. I'm very pleased to be here in Columbus. I've been here for a couple days. We have just had meetings of the APS Board and APS Council. And so it's with that background that I can say that the business of the American Physical Society is in very good shape to try to launch this meeting. We'll hear more about that during the next hour. I would say that we are in very good shape, but of course we can't be complacent. Times change, needs change, people engage with the society change, and situations evolve, and so we have to be planning for the future. And we'll talk about that as we go into the meeting today. So why do I say we're in great shape? I'd say that our publications are still the most highly respected physics publication journals in the world. They are growing in submissions and papers we publish, so there is growth there, and the respect is enormous. We are also thinking, as we'll hear from our editor-in-chief, we are thinking about new ways of publicizing physics, of publishing physics, of disseminating the research results that come out of physics. So we're not only highly successful with those journals, but we're also thinking about the future very carefully, and we'll be leading in certain areas there. Again, with our meetings, meetings remain extraordinarily popular within the membership of the American Physical Society. The numbers are growing. I'm not sure where we'll end up with the April meeting here in Columbus, but I know that the March meeting we just had down in Los Angeles was a record number of attendees. And I would also say I spent a week there. It went extraordinarily smoothly and was very welcomed by our membership and by a lot of other people who came by to hear about the physics. I would say that our outreach activities are the standard for outreach work nationally. We are called upon by the federal government to show how our model is working in terms of encouraging the broadest set of people to go into physics, whether it's at the education level or at the PhD level. At the undergraduate level or at the graduate student level. We are seeing increased investments by the federal government and by private sources, and the models that we use and the metrics that we use and our success that we see is the standard there. I would say our government outreach activities, we can point to a fair number of successes where we have advocated for support for science and for science being incorporated in policy for the government. We can find examples of that. And if we also have a very well-defined template for how we advocate for science in terms of engaging our members and engaging them locally with their representatives. And we've been very successful in that advocating role that we take on, especially in Washington and also in local offices. So I could go on and on about why I think we are so helpful, so successful. We just finished selecting congressional fellows. That went very well. We have growing international activities, and we have a task force to help us grow in that area. And as Kate mentioned, and as we'll hear about, fiscally we are strong. Of course, we never have the resources we need to execute on all of our ideas. And so we are seeking new resources, but I would say that fundamentally we're very, very strong in all of our fiscal metrics. But the key this year is strategic planning, and I think Kate will address strategic planning a little bit more. On Monday afternoon, we'll have a strategic planning meeting group. We'll get together and get ideas from the membership. We have a structure. We have some pillars. We have some subcommittees. We have a structure to develop a strategic plan for the next, say, decade. But we need input on the specifics of that from the membership. And that'll happen Monday at 3:30. So messages were very strong. Messages we're planning for the future, and we're welcoming all of the input from the volunteers and from the broadest membership within APS. So let's move on to some more specifics, and I'll ask Kate to come up and give the report from the CEO.
Thank you, Roger. So, to pick up from where Roger left off, yes, APS is strong. Our membership is over 55,000 and growing. Our membership is very engaged, especially in the programs of our meetings, which is incredibly important. We have an operating budget of $59 million and over $180 million in reserves. And as Roger mentioned, we publish premier journals covering a whole suite of physics areas, and our meetings are very successful as well. We have nationally recognized programs, particularly in education, diversity, and outreach. And physics as a discipline itself is growing and evolving. We're at an all-time high in terms of bachelor's and PhD production. And here is a pie chart of our membership cohorts. As you'll notice, the graduate students make up over 25% of our members, and we have a growing undergraduate component. And the hatched areas define the international folks in each of the sectors. The total membership is up by over 2.5% from last year. We have some new members of the senior management team whom I'd like to introduce. Michael Tennyson joined APS as our editor-in-chief on September 1 of last year. He comes to us from a position as University Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University, and where he was also Associate Director of the MSU Facility for Rare Isotope Beams. Michael's originally from Germany and received his PhD from Stony Brook, and so he's sort of in a way coming home and moving into the Ridge offices there on Long Island. And Michael's been very active in the leadership of APS. In particular, he's former chair of the Division of Nuclear Physics and has also engaged in a number of our education programs. And we have our new Chief Government Affairs Officer, Francis Leakey. You'll hear from him in a moment as well. Slake has been with APS for over 20 years and received his PhD in physics from the University of Illinois. He's undertaken an impressive initiative in the last year to transform the way that APS promotes science by engaging members in grassroots advocacy, and he will describe a bit more about that shortly. With Slake's appointment, we made the decision to change the name of the office that was formerly the Office of Public Affairs, now to the Office of Government Affairs, to more accurately reflect its activities. So now let me just turn to a quick description of strategic planning and why we're engaging in this this year. Our strategic plan that's been in place for the last 5 years is really an artifact of the old triumvirate leadership. And the focus of it was under the purview of the executive officer at that time in 2011, 2012, when we were working on this. The focus was mainly on membership in the programmatic areas such as education, diversity, outreach, international affairs, public affairs, now government relations, and industry and careers. So that was just because I felt we needed a strategic plan, and my fellow operating officers at the time felt that they were good and they didn't need to participate in that. So the goals emphasized serving communities, and I remind you of them, to better serve our members, to better serve the physics community, to better serve society, and to increase our organizational excellence. This plan has actually been very valuable as a roadmap, but it lacks thoughtful attention to an activity that's quite big for us and significant, and that is our scientific publishing. In addition, it doesn't really look at carefully the financial health and sustainability of the organization. And without these vital components, we really have an incomplete plan. So the goals in the current plan have been very valuable and are still relevant. But so I envision the future strategic plan we're developing this year to have a broader focus to embrace the whole arc of what APS does, but also continuity with the old plan. The work of this will be co-creation work involving the senior management team, some APS staff, and definitely volunteer leaders, especially in working with subcommittees. And we will have facilitation by a consultant, which is actually very important in terms of coordinating and driving the process. In any undertaking like this, getting the balance right is very important. We've set a pretty aggressive timeline, and it's important to involve the right people. We have a lot of constituencies in the APS whom we need to hear from. And we're trying to make sure that we help to guide the process so we get input at the right level. And getting high-level input is especially important. But let me emphasize, we're undertaking this strategic planning from a position of strength, which is a great place to be as we think ahead and think big. So we started off thinking about a straw man construct that would have 4 pillars. The first being ensuring a meaningful role in scientific research dissemination. You can imagine that that involves our scientific publishing and also our meetings. The second pillar, serving communities, really wraps up or folds up the goals from our previous plan, and where we vowed to better serve the membership, the physics community, and society. The third pillar there is securing financial sustainability, and the fourth one is increasing our organizational excellence, something that we always need to be thinking about. And as we've talked about these with various constituencies, we've realized that several of these pillars sort of are really should, rather than being pillars, would be more appropriately deemed foundational elements. And so we've come up with another, oh, that didn't get incorporated. an edifice which actually looks, has some foundations, that is ensuring our financial sustainability and also increasing our organizational excellence, so that those are both supporting two pillars which, are securing a role in scientific research dissemination and also serving communities. So you'll see a picture of that at some time shortly. So we've had lots of input from the membership already, which is great. We've had good discussions at the leadership convocation with unit leaders. We've had discussions with the board and council. Roger mentioned the town halls at both our March and April meetings, but also focus groups have been held at the March meeting and will be held here as well in Columbus. There are a number of one-on-one interviews that have taken place between a number of our members as well as the APS consultant. And information and opportunity for members to give input on the web will be communicated through not only APS News emails, but also social media as well. And here is a screenshot of the web page where we're inviting input from members. We're aiming to present the plan to the board and council for approval in November, and we certainly hope to roll it out to the membership in 2019, right at the beginning, at our leadership convocation, which takes place in the late January, early February timeframe. Thank you very much for your attention. And let me now introduce APS Treasurer Jim Hall.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to everyone. As you've heard from both Roger and Kate, the society is in very good shape, and so let me tell you a little bit about our financial situation. First thing is we've just completed the audit of our 2017 financial numbers, and it's good when the audit report is mostly boilerplate. That happens when everything's in good shape. We got very high marks from our auditors, and there were no significant findings or material misstatements. Of course, we're living in an era where scientific publishing is going through issues to do with open access, and we don't know how that's all going to come out, and it's a concern for us, always a concern for us. It has been for many years. But despite all that uncertainty, we're continuing to grow our subscription base, and our revenues have gone up. And our revenue beat our budget expectations this year, and our expenses also were lower than our expectations. So it was a very good year from the standpoint of our operations. We turned in a $1.35 million positive gain on operations, and that was substantially better than we were expecting. We were expecting to have a negative gain on operations, which would have been canceled out by gains in our investments that would still put us in the positive. We also had, those of you who own stock have probably had a very good year in the past year, as the society did. Our portfolio, which is very wisely invested for us by Townley Capital, grew by 16.5% for that year. And at the end of the year, the portfolio was worth $173 million. So we have a lot of money in the endowment. Some of that is constrained, restricted for philanthropic purposes, or restricted because it secures liabilities for the future, like retirement benefits and so forth. But still, it gives us a very large cushion that should be able to allow us to take some initiatives and weather any storms that may be on the horizon. We also have a strong cash position and very little debt. We did make a change in our post-retirement health benefit plan, and this is thanks to the leadership of our outgoing CFO, Jane Gould, who's done a fantastic job for us, including a fantastic job recruiting a new CFO. And this change in the post-retirement health benefit was to reduce our future liability without lessening the great benefits package we have for our employees. And so that is going to result in some considerable savings for us this year and in future years. This is my last slide, just showing a little historically how our revenue and expenses has gone up and down. So last year, things looked very troubling because our revenue had come down and our expenses had gone up, which is a very bad combination. That was reversed this year, and you can look at the very last line in this view graph. Excuse me, slide. I'm old school. I say view graph. The bottom line shows the change in net assets, where you can see we lost money in 2014. We were flat in 2015. We lost even more money in 2016, and we made money in 2017. And this, again, is not counting the very impressive growth we've had in our investment portfolio over this whole period. So our budget is to lose $4.4 million next year, but that will be paid for by an assumed increase, again, in our investment portfolio. So that's all I had to say, and now I'd like to introduce our Speaker of the Council, Tim Gay, from the University of Nebraska.
Thanks, Jim. I want to begin by doing a little bit of sociological research. Could everybody who does not draw an APS paycheck or have an elected APS office raise your hand, please? The AV guy and the, okay, two, all right, thank you. See how this works. Good. We had a one-day meeting of the APS Council of Representatives on Wednesday. It was successful. I want to just remind you who and what the Council of Representatives is. It is an elected body from the units and from the APS as a whole, which is charged with focusing on all matters of science and membership, including science policy. And I've highlighted some of the major charges that we have from the Constitution as our work. Establishment of oversight of the publications of the Society. That's a job that we share with the board. Approval of policy statements and scientific strategy. Establishment and oversight of divisions, topical groups, forums, and sections. Scientific meetings and conferences. Admission of members and election of fellows. All prizes and awards, that was a topic that we considered on Wednesday. Final approval of any amendment to the Constitution and bylaws, and any other responsibilities that relate to the scientific mission of the Society and are referred to us by the Council. So we're busy, and we've got a lot of interesting work that we're doing. I just want to remind you briefly of the composition of the council. We have 34 councilors elected from the units, plus 34 councilors total, plus the presidential line. 24 councilors are elected from the units. There are 4 general councilors who stand for election across the entire society, 4 international councilors, the same, and then chairs of the nominating committee and of the panel on Public Affairs, POPA. We have 3 yearly meetings in April, this one, September, which is a Blue Jeans or virtual meeting, and then one in November. This week we took up 3 primary topics. One was a report from the Committee on Prizes and Awards. There's a lot of discussion regarding prizes and awards. Specifically, do we have too many? Do we have too few? Are they properly funded? We're responding to the Haxton report on prizes and awards and just maintaining a sort of a constant overview of that situation. We got report and feedback from the ongoing work of the International Engagement Task Force which is being chaired by Jonathan Bagger with lots of help from Amy Flatten. We also did a strategic planning exercise to give feedback to the strategic planning subcommittees. Finally, I'd like to tell you a little bit about things we're considering for the rest of the year. Get your feedback if you've got some suggestions on other topics we might be considering. These are all based on APS's science policy and outreach. It turns out that the African American Culture Museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C. has, other than the mandatory exhibit about George Washington Carver, has absolutely no science in it. So that's something we're interested in looking into. That was really a vision of our most recent 2 years ago president, Homer Neal, from the University of Michigan. That we would like to look in a broad, integrative way at our outreach programs, including PhysTech and bridge programs, look at their scope and goals and see how well they're integrated, and are we happy with those. Generally speaking, I think we are, but we'd like to see how the whole package fits together. This is a time of very new and different political environment for scientific societies, and indeed the public in general seems to be dismissive of science. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Is there any way we can reach out to change that perception of science in the public's mind in this time of post-truth discourse? How do we grow our international presence? What roles do the journals play? Should we have a March meeting in Toronto? Should we have an editorial office in Beijing? Neither of these are being considered at this point, but it just sets the tone for the kind of topic we might discuss. And finally, and of course, this is perhaps the most important one, young members are our lifeblood. They're the ones that will become the leaders in the future, and how can we get them more involved? And we're talking to the Forum on Graduate Student Affairs in that regard. And I think that's it for me. Yes, good. And I'd like to now turn the dais over to Michael Tennyson, who's our editor-in-chief, and Matthew Salter, who's our publisher.
Thank you, Tim. It's actually a real great honor to serve as the editor-in-chief of the APS, as it gives me the opportunity to give back to an organization and a community that I have valued as a member for a very, very long time. Let me start off by showing at least one highlight. Okay, this is my title slide. So it shows the office with the vision for the journal and the society advancing the diffusion of the knowledge of physics. Let me start off with at least one highlight from the journals, and this was one clearly last October, the observation of neutron star mergers. I certainly cannot take credit for this, but the editors from Physical Review Letters worked very hard to make this publication very fast and very smooth. And we also would like to thank the collaborations that they selected to publish their work in Physical Review Letters. I think it demonstrates that the journal continues to be of very, very high quality and high standard viewed by the researchers. This year marks the 125th anniversary of Physical Review. We honor this or celebrate this with a variety of activities. Hopefully you've seen it on the Physical Review web pages. The lanyard that you have around your neck right now says 125th anniversary of the Physical Review journals. There are posters out there every week on the website. We highlight one scientific achievement during the last 125 years. Here's the timeline. there. And in addition, every month in the issue of APS News, we highlight a different journal. So there are 14 journals, so it will spill over a little bit into 2019, but I think that's okay. The first 3 were Physical Review Letters, Physical Review B, and Physical Review Accelerators and Beams, and the next one in next month issue will be Physical Review X. So let me go on and introduce a couple of the new lead editors that started this year. The first one is Chris Layton from the University of Minnesota. He's the first lead editor for Physical Review Materials, which is our youngest and most recent journal that started earlier last year, and it is doing very well. Matthew is going to talk a little bit more about it a little later. Then Physical Review Applied had for a couple of months an interim editor, and we were pleased to appoint Stephen Forrest from the University of Michigan as the permanent lead editor of Physical Review Applied. Then after long tenure of Achim Richter as the lead editor for Reviews of Modern Physics, he retired. So we selected a new one, which is Randy Kamian from the University of Pennsylvania, who's leading Reviews of Modern Physics now. And then finally, John Kim and Gary Leal from UCLA and UCSB, respectively, were reappointed as the lead editors of Physical Review Fluids. In other journal news, we are happy to announce that we have, for the first time, an APS Journal Award, which is the Irvin Oppenheim Award for Physical Review E. It is there to recognize outstanding recent contributions to physics by early career researchers that were published in Physical Review E, and to commemorate the founding editor of the journal, Irving Oppenheim. So self-nominations are available on the website, and we encourage for eligible researchers to self-nominate. We entered Scope 3 as an APS agreement, which means that all high-energy physics papers posted on the archives under the high-energy physics category will be published as open access in Physical Review Letters, PhysRev-C, and PhysRev-D. Gordon Drake will resign as the lead editor of Physical Review A after having served for 13 years. We'd like to express a great thank you to Gordon. It was a great service to the journals. And the search for a new lead editor for Physical Review has just been started, and the ad is coming out next month. The chair of the search committee is Tony Starris from the University of Nebraska. Finally, I would like to highlight another initiative that we started last year, and that is a series of workshops which are called Physics Next workshops. We had last year the first 2 on materials design discovery and one on from quantum fields to condensed matter. The next one will be in a couple of weeks on physics on living matters, and very recently we decided on the second one for this year, which is on machine learning, which will be held later in October 4 through 10. And with that, I hand it over to Matthew Salter, the publisher, who will present more numbers related to journals.
Thanks very much, Michael. It's a huge pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to be here with you. My first visit to Ohio. It's lovely to be here, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful April meeting. As Michael said, I'd just like to give maybe a few numbers to back up what Michael has been saying, and also to echo what Roger has been saying about the strength of our journals, both as intellectual products of the society and the underpinning of our research life and our intellectual life, and also the other contributions that they make to the society. I'm happy to report that in 2017, we saw a growth both in unique submissions to the journals. So this is the number of submissions. Where are we? What's the... So this is the number of papers, unique manuscripts that were submitted to our journals. There is another slightly larger figure down below, which takes into account transfers between journals in the portfolio, which we count as new submissions. But the actual unique number of submissions grew by 2.5%, and we managed to publish just under 19,000 peer review articles. There are slightly more when we include other editorials and errata and other products that appear there. So that was a growth of 3.2% on 2016, And as you will see, given the condition that we don't change our criteria for selecting papers, and that certainly is nothing we have done to decrease our rigorousness and our selectivity and our quality, we are publishing more of what we receive, which means we're getting better and we're attracting the kind of submissions we want to publish, which is very encouraging. It's a similar pattern to the previous year. And this marks really a kind of reversal of the decline in numbers which we'd seen for a couple of years, some years ago. So it is a very healthy position and one we can be justifiably very pleased with. Michael also referred to some of our journals in particular, and I'd just like to look at how our young folks are doing in terms of submissions and publications. We've had some really very, very encouraging news with Physical Review Applied, which was published first in 2014. It received a very good initial impact factor and then another full impact factor last year, and last year saw an absolutely tremendous growth both in submissions and in publications. So a huge change, and published over 400 papers for the first time by the end of the year. Physical Review Fluids published almost 500 papers, which is a very good increase, a very steady growth. I'm anticipating it will go to maybe 600 papers or more this year. And really, the standout was the fantastic debut of Physical Review Materials. There's a huge thank you there, of course, to the community who supported that journal, really took it to their heart, and the wonderful editorial team there led by Chris Layton and Athanasios Chantis and other people at APS. This really marks only under half a year's worth of, under around 8 months worth of submissions, out of which we published 357 papers. And these journals are all showing great signs of growth in the first quarter of this year. So wonderful progress there. We know, I mentioned impact factors, and we know that impact factors are only one measure of how journals grow and are doing. It is one that people pay attention to. We don't make it something that we focus exclusively on, but it is quite good news this year that of 11 journals which have impact factors, 10 of those grew. Physical Review X went close to 13. Physical Review Letters, again, well over 8. And Physical Review Applied's first full impact factor was 4.8, which is a really tremendous performance. Reviews of Modern Physics, of course, is our highest impact factor journal, and it achieved almost an impact factor of almost 37 and growing. So, as I say, one metric for sure, but one that is encouragingly growing in our case. I wanted just touch a little bit on the Scope 3 participation. As members and people will know, we signed an agreement to join Scope 3, a consortium organised by CERN for the large-scale open access publishing of high-energy physics research. We joined in January 1st very smoothly. I'd like to thank everybody on the team who did technical, legal, marketing, and financial work to make that project happen. As Michael pointed out, this allows the publication of high-energy physics papers as judged by the posting category on the archive to be published in 3 of our journals, Physical Review Letters, D and C. This data is slightly old. As of just earlier today, we had over 600 papers published in total under the Scope 3 scheme. And we're expecting also that to grow and expand throughout the year. We've also undertaken a major review of our collateral. You saw maybe some journal covers and some collateral covers in Michael's presentation. That's part of an ongoing overhaul and review of how we present our material. This is a photograph from an image taken from APS March, where we had a much larger booth with the 125th anniversary collateral and design, and we've had more engaging games, and we've made a lot more social media outlay, and also just looking to engage people who come to see our exhibits. It's all really part of getting the 125th brand out there and really raising our game with regard to the way we promote our journals to our readers and engage them. Hopefully you'll see some of that at our Stall in the Village later during the APS March meeting. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Francis Leakey, who's our Chief of Government Affairs Officer. Francis.
So with the Office of Government Affairs, we have a very convenient metric to evaluate our activities, and that's it. Did we win or did we lose? So let me start off describing a couple of wins. We've had 2 wins so far this year. Here's the first one, and it's on the budget. The president a year ago had proposed deep cuts to science, and on March 23rd of this year, the appropriations was finally signed into law, and we saw gains. A lot of organizations contributed to that win, but APS made a unique contribution. And if you've been reading APS news, you've been seeing us profile every month the technique that we've been using. It's state-based. We lead with constituents. We have those constituents meet with their members of Congress. We do op-eds, so it's grassroots mobilization at the state level. The second win just happened last week. So first, a little bit of background. This was a win in open access, but let me just describe the role that the Office of Government Affairs has in open access. And I can say it in one sentence. The goal of the Office of Government Affairs on open access is to push back on legislation that would arbitrarily impose or accelerate a transition to open access. That's it. That's what we do. And the thinking behind that is, given what's at stake in open access for our authors, given what's at stake for APS and its members, the transition to open access should be done thoughtfully, it should be done deliberatively, and it should not be done because Congress imposed some arbitrary deadline. So that actual position I just described was put to the test last week when Assemblyman Mark Stone introduced a bill on open access, and I put up here one provision in the bill. And that provision would reduce the embargo time from 12 months, the current 12 months, down to 6 months. So the Board Executive Committee discussed this. We pulled together a letter of opposition explaining why this was a bad idea, and we submitted it to Assemblyman Stone and others in the California Assembly. And on April 5th, he changed his mind, and that provision went back to 12 months. So, you know, a wonderful success here, pushing back on what was a bad legislative idea. But there's another plus in this, and I think it demonstrates something that we had done several times last year. We can be nimble and responsive and effective at APS. We actually heard about that, pulled together a letter, got it signed by our presidential line, and sent it to the Assemblyman all within 24 hours. So that's something I think should be encouraging to APS members. So those are 2 wins we've had so far this year. Let me shift to some of the things that are going on in the office right now. One of them is we know there's a transition going on in Congress. There's a lot of leadership positions that have already changed, and they do seem to change every week. So a couple positions I want to describe. One of them is there is a new chair of Appropriations Committee in the Senate. It was Thad Cochran, and now it's Senator Shelby. We're really well positioned there. We have mobilized in his state of Alabama before. We have some good constituents with good, compelling stories. So I feel like we're well positioned in that change. Another change is there'll be a new chair to the Appropriations Committee that oversees the NIST and NSF. And the new chair is Senator Moran from Kansas. Again, I think we're well positioned there. We've developed some really influential constituents in the state of Kansas over the past few months. Shifting to the House, there's also changes there. Frelinghuysen, who has been a real champion for science on the Appropriations Committee, is retiring. And in that position, what I've heard so far, 2 people are left in the running for that position. One is Representative Granger, one's Representative Graves. We're really well positioned with Granger. We've worked with a constituent, done an op-ed. He knows Granger personally, so I think we're well positioned there. Graves is a work in progress. And the last thing we're thinking about, of course, is the possibility that that entire House may flip to Democrats, so we're preparing for that possibility as well. There's also 2 new issues in the office, so let me describe them briefly. One of them is the House recently passed what's called the Prosper Bill, and I have to look this up. It's one of these tortured acronyms. Prosper stands for Promoting Real Opportunity, Success, Prosperity Through Education Reform. So that's passed in the House, and it does not live up to its name. So the Prosper Bill actually does some damaging things. And it does 2 things in particular. It eliminates loan programs, Stafford loans in particular, which a lot of young scientists use to get through college. And it also changes the payback schedule. So if you'd make a decision to go on to graduate school, that loan would immediately start accruing interest, which acts as a disincentive to going to graduate school. So those provisions would harm our students, and so we're going to take action on this, much in the way we did with the tax proposal from last November. Maybe you read about how we responded to that in APS News. And our typical tactic is grassroots, state-based, let constituents do the talking, try to tell some powerful stories. And so what we want to do is make sure that those provisions never appear in the Senate bill. Now, the Senate bill hasn't been written yet, but we know the two people who are responsible for writing it. It's Senator Alexander from Tennessee and Senator Murray from the state of Washington. So what we want to do is, I'll tell you, I would like to find stories about the effect of those two provisions on students in those states. In fact, best of all worlds, we would find a physics major who is on a Stafford loan, and if that bill were law now and the Stafford loan were eliminated, they would be unable to afford to actually go on to college. So sadly, that story was all too easy to find, and we have found two students who are going to tell their story. And Justin Powell wrote an op-ed, which has been accepted in a Knoxville newspaper, should be coming out in the next couple of days, talking about his experience and what would happen if that actually became law. If the Stafford loans were eliminated, he would be unable to afford to go to school. He'd have to go into the workforce immediately. He's married. He's got a 1-year-old child. And the theme of his op-ed is called, "No Congress, I am not too poor to pursue my dream." And then we've also got Shua Sanchez saying a story like that in the state of Washington. And then what we're doing, it's a little bit different from our typical approach to lobbying. We only are targeting 2 members right now, so we don't need to contact every member of Congress. Instead, we're doing a petition. Students from all across the country will be asked to sign that petition, and the petition will go to those 2 members of Congress. Another issue that we're working on, last March, at the March meeting and the executive committee meeting of the DCMP, I was alerted by the head of graduate admissions at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, that they had a dramatic, sudden drop in international applications to their PhD program. 23% drop, where they had previously been seeing increases. So that's an alarming number, and so what we did in the Office of Government Affairs is start querying other departments and finding out what's going on there. So let me tell you what I've learned so far. Some departments are unaffected by this. We've heard from Berkeley, Stanford, MIT, their numbers are flat. However, of the roughly 40 universities we've contacted so far, almost every other one is seeing drops, and let me give you a sense for what we've heard from them. It's dramatic. Let me tell you a little bit more about this. One thing is that it's not just unique to physics. So I've contacted colleagues at the American Chemical Society and IEEE. Electrical engineering departments are seeing this. Chemistry departments are seeing this too. Some other things that we've learned, it's not just a drop in applications from Muslim countries. It's not just that Pakistanis are no longer applying or Iranians are no longer applying. It's actually drops in applications from China, from Korea, from Canada, from India. The last thing I should say is we're still collecting data. We're still trying to analyze the problem. And it is also too early to tell how this is going to impact incoming classes, whether quality is going to suffer in any way or whether overall numbers are going to be reduced. It's simply too early to tell. But this is a work in progress. It's one that we don't do alone. We're going to be doing this in cooperation with other societies that are seeing this effect too. So that's a quick summary of the things that are going on in the office. And let me turn it back to Kate for Q&A.
Thanks, Lake, and thank you, everybody who spoke at this meeting. And now we open it up to questions, and we will. The whole group of us would be delighted to entertain your questions. So any questions here in the room? We also may have some questions coming through online. But yes, Virginia, Oh,
Let me just stand up and be loud, okay?
I think it's a matter of broadcasting it, so
Okay.
therefore, yeah.
It's on, okay. You might think I had my say at council, but nobody paid any attention. I represent the only unit of this society whose members do not have a place to publish our papers anywhere in the publications of this society. I represent the Forum on History of Physics. No place now in the PhysRev portfolio is interested in history. We feel unloved.
Okay. Any comments from our editor-in-chief?
One thing that I've been doing since I started interact with all the different divisions and forum, and I would love to come to your executive committee meeting, and then we can talk about it.
Monday morning, 8 o'clock.
Good, I'll be there.
Terrific. Thank you. Any other questions?
Kate, we're not seeing any questions
I just have
online.
one quick question. Yeah, one
Oh,
quick
sure.
question. On the increase in submissions to journals and publications in journals, is there any kind of breakdown in terms of where the submissions are coming from, in terms of coming from international versus U.S.?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I don't have actually a breakdown in terms of a country-by-country breakdown, but what I would say is that in terms of submissions, those coming from the United States are between 20 and 25%, and the rest are coming from other countries around the world. So it is a very international set of journals, and we receive lots of great submissions, right from across the world. It's going to vary from journal to journal, but if you're at all interested in having more detailed information, I'm sure we can sort that out for you.
The question was in terms of the growth. Is it growing internationally more than domestically?
So what I would say is, over the years, the growth has really been in the international publications as a fraction of the total. If you were to go back to the late 80s, for example, or the mid 80s, the majority of those papers would be coming from the United States, and now the trend as a fraction is going down, and the international are going up. So the growth has, and the internationalization has been doing that over the last certainly 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Matthew. Any other questions?
Kate, we don't seem to have any that I can see online, but I would like to encourage anyone who is online or anyone here, if you have any questions after you leave here and would like to submit them, we'd be more than happy to handle them. The email address is governance@aps.org.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. And thank you all for attending, and I'd like to thank all the speakers. Great.